I'd like to introduce Deneen Simpson. She is MassDEP's Director of Environmental Justice, and she's also a program manager within the Bureau of Policy and thank you, Deneen. And she's here today to tell us about recent discussions and developments over the past year in particular with respect to the department focusing on environmental justice issues and incorporating those that focus across all of our programs.
So thank you, Liz. Thank you, Paul, for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm going to give a really high overview of the activities that are going on at DEP regarding environmental justice and equity as directed by Commissioner Suberg. So I do not have a slide deck. I'm just going to talk freely about what we're doing. So last summer, specifically around June, Commissioner Suberg sent an email to all of MassDEP staff discussing the tragic deaths of Black citizens, the demands for police reform. He also spoke about the protests that were taking place across the country and the calls for change and the need for action. So Commissioner Suberg further discussed that change is being called for in many areas of society that perpetuates systemic racism. And so Commissioner Suberg called for all MassDEP staff to examine our programs, policies, and our activities to determine whether or not they perpetuate or even exacerbate racial disparities by failing to address them. So since then, MassDEP has taken a closer look at how we do business with a focus both internally and externally. First, I'm going to talk about what we've been doing internally. We've been taking a look at our cultures, our agency's culture and our practices, how we are supporting equality and diversity and fairness when it comes to recruiting, hiring processes, training, promotional opportunities, and advancement, as well as emphasizing respect and inclusion in our everyday interactions with one another. Our goal at MassDEP is to have our staff reflect the diversity of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So those are a few of the things that we're doing internally. And now I'm going to talk about a couple of things that we're doing externally. We've committed to examining all our regulations, our policies, our services to ensure that we are implementing our activities and opportunities and being inclusive to everyone. We're looking at them to see if there are any unequal benefits. We're evaluating and making those changes. This includes looking at programs where our external stakeholders have identified maybe in the past where things were not level or an equal playing field. We're looking to see if we can address those concerns that were brought to our attention years ago about our work. And we're looking to see where we can do better because we know we all can do better. Commissioner Suberg has specifically charged all the bureaus, all the programs and offices to look at, again, the activities, the programs and the policies through an environmental justice and equity lens, which is really difficult to do unless you're doing this type of work. Sometimes it feels as though you're giving environmental justice populations, more advantages, or you're giving them, special treatment, but it has nothing to do with that. It's just trying to level the playing field. MassDEP is conducting deliberate outreach to EJ populations and EJ organizations when conducting its key agency activities, which for MassDEP, our key agency activities are permitting, licensing, regulatory development and reg revisions. We conduct public hearings, public comments. We do policy development, environmental monitoring. We actually provide grant opportunities, and we have internal initiatives. So to ensure that the communities are given a voice and opportunities to be a part of the decision-making process, we are making sure that we reach out to them early and often about any project that may potentially impact or affect them or their community. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about environmental justice? We're talking about the basic right for everyone, no matter their race, ethnicity, national origin, income, or English language proficiency, having the right to breathe fresh air, drink clean water, have an opportunity to participate in meaningful involvement, and as far as what's going to happen in their community. So when we're talking about decision-making, they should be at the table if this is going to affect them. We're talking about projects that may impact them, projects that may not be in their community, but may impact them because of emissions that travel. We all know that emissions do not travel straight up, it spreads across. So we're making sure that we are engaging with them very early, very often, to give them a seat at the table and a voice to address any concerns or ask any questions that they may have about a project that may impact them. So I talked about what environmental justice is. So now I'm just going to tell you what are EJ populations. Some of you may already know this, but it's not bad to hear it again. We're talking about those populations that meet one of the three of the following criteria. The median annual household is at or below 65% of the statewide median income for Massachusetts. 25% or more of the residents are minority, or 25% or more of the residents have English isolation, which means there's no one at the age of 14 or older in the home that speaks English only or speaks English very well. Some of the activities that Commissioner Subert has tasked the agency with is he's developed a senior equity group, which I'm a part of, and Paul is also a member. So we meet weekly to discuss how the agency can improve both internally and externally, soliciting feedback and ideas to pursue new opportunities to increase equity. To date, the equity work has produced important communications and dialogue, and we've developed an equity work plan, which is everything we're trying to do. And there's a status column to say where we are, within the progress of developing this work plan. We're reviewing our stakeholders and our advisory groups. We have an online suggestion box that all staff can submit suggestions and recommendations about how we can do better, both internally and externally, using that EJ and equity lens. Commissioner Subert has tasked all the regions and the bureaus to do another environmental justice initiative. These have been going on for quite some time. There was one done in Taunton, one done in Springfield, one done in Framingham. So the regional offices have been tasked with that in the past, but now Commissioner Subert has asked the Boston bureaus to also become a part of this EJ initiative. So those are underway. We also have a cumulative impact work group at DEP working in the AIR program to discuss, again, cumulative impact. This is something that for years EJ stakeholders have been asking about. What about cumulative impact? And there's a lot of states that have been talking about it, but not a lot of states have had success with cumulative impact. So we're taking a real deliberate effort to identify cumulative impact and develop cumulative impact analysis. That is in progress now. And then we also have a communications outreach committee, which is led by our Chief of Staff, Brian Faris. And it consists of, I want to say it's 17 staff across the agency, not just managers. There's also line staff that get together and talk about how we can share with our stakeholders, with the communities across the Commonwealth, things that we're doing within the agency. So there's grant opportunities. We're tweeting or we're posting something on Instagram about grant opportunities. If we've done something that's really super great, we are sending that out, sharing it with our stakeholders. So we're trying to do a lot of external work to make sure that everyone feels engaged, everyone has access to the work that DEP is doing. And again, there's always room for improvement. So we're always seeking input from others to help us with this task. I have to say the commissioner has been very deliberate in having these hard conversations with senior staff, and they trickle down to line staff about inclusion, about diversity, about how we can be better and provide access to EJ populations within our, the work that we do. And one area that the senior equity group is discussing is MassDEP's, again, the advisory and stakeholder groups. There's much interest in diversifying the stakeholder groups and advisory groups. And so those conversations are being done, within Wayside Cleanup, Bureau of Air and Waste, and also the Bureau of Water Resources. Similar discussions around MassDEP's workforce is also being done, to reflect, again, the diversity in the Commonwealth. Our workforce, again, should reflect the diversity within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we're hoping that our bureaus and advisory groups and stakeholder groups can also look that way as well. So another group that the commissioner has put together is a group called ACE. It's the Advisory Committee on Equity and Diversity, and it's 13 members. Again, it's managers and it's line staff, and we meet regularly to talk about how we can improve Internally, the diversity and inclusion aspect of DEP, we give these recommendations to the senior equity group for review, possible implementation. So this group has met, I want to say, at least 5 or 6 times. It takes a little bit of time for a group to get together and gel and trust one another. So we've had some really good conversations, being candid and open about the culture of DEP, the diversity within DEP, and how inclusive or lack of inclusive it is to some people's, perception. So that group is led by our diversity and inclusion director, Michelle Waters-Ecanum. I'm also a member of that group as well. And then we also had a public involvement plan, which is a requirement of our Title VI, is a requirement of Title VI under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as the EJ policy of 2017. So we have been, again, trying to be deliberate with doing outreach when we're doing permitting to ensure that we are being inclusive of EJ populations, but we also took it a step further and we're including this outreach to EJ populations for grant opportunities, when we're revising regs, when we're promulgating regs, anywhere where we are going to be affecting or could affect or impact an EJ population. We are being deliberate and focusing on those groups and being inclusive to invite them to the table. In September of 2020, I and a few DEP staff drafted what we call our Environmental Justice Public Involvement Plan guidance, which is different than what MCP and Wayside Cleanup has for a Pip guidance. But the guidance was shared with all of DEP staff in September 2020. And with that, we conducted a 10 series of trainings. I did it myself along with Wayside Cleanup's own Ellie Donovan, who was in the audience today. We did 8 trainings within DEP, and we did 2 trainings outside of DEP to DPH and EEA and the AG's office. That was a guidance to give staff some important tips, tools about how they can do engagement. There's lists of EJ organizations, there's translation issues sometimes, there's the ability to place documents in areas where EJ populations have access to, especially with COVID. We would normally use the library, city halls, but because those are closed or under appointment only, we have to figure out how we can share this guidance and make sure that people know what we're trying to do at DEP. So the commissioner tasked all the regional directors and the assistant commissioners to be responsible for implementation of the activities covered by the document. So the training consisted of a lot of managers, some line staff, some supervisors, just to give them some ideas about what we're doing, how we're doing it, how it's supposed to be done, but not to give them a checklist of any sorts to have them say, okay, I've done this, I've done that. We gave them the guidance and the tools, and for them to develop checklists if they wanted to, or just to look at the guidance and figure out how do we address the concerns or the impacts of this community. All EJ communities are different, their needs are different. So that means any PIP that you do most likely will be different depending on the audience and who you are speaking to at that particular time. The guidance is for an internal use, but the PIPs, once they're completed, are available for the public. Some staff are sharing them, some staff are not, but the guidance, again, is an internal tool for DEP staff, but the developed PIPs from those guidance are available to the public. So again, the training was shared with all staff. We talked about lessons learned, best management practices. We identified our key agency activities, identified which activities were going to be a part of this PIP. And I think the training went over really well because now I'm getting draft PIPs like every other day to review to make sure that we are capturing everything that should be captured. And I am a staff of 1. I have an intern and I have the EJ team. So as much as I am thrilled that we're actually doing this great work, it is a lot of work. So I'm hoping to get some help over the next few months to help me with all the EJ work. I don't want it to stop, so I'm trying to stay on top of it. But it is a lot of work. And so to get back to the PIPs, I know somewhat about public involvement plans when it comes to wayside cleanup and MCP regulations. So they are somewhat different. than what the PIPs I was referring to as, the ones that we're doing for our key agency activities. But I do believe there is some similarities. I know there's outreach, and I know that there's community engagement in both. And so I offer my assistance to any wayside cleanup staff when they're working in EJ populations, when it's appropriate. And I'm also very interested in providing any assistance I can with the upcoming TAG grants. I'm excited to hear more about that. And with the redevelopment of any brownfields or any general work, pertaining to brownfields, as many are located in EJ populations. I have a few more things just to say. We are working on the 2010, or working with the 2010 U.S. Census data. Unfortunately, we have not updated our data yet to the 2020 census, but I do know as we speak, EEA GIS is currently working on maps to address the 2020 U.S. Census data. So I'm looking forward to seeing those, to see how much has changed or what hasn't changed. And also at EEA, there is a director of EJ now, Rishi Reddy, formerly of DEP, who is working on putting together a cumulative impact work group, which includes members across the Secretariat, DPH, academia, EJ organizations, and medical professionals, which is separate than the group that's working on cumulative impact at DEP and the Bureau of Air and Waste. There is some overlap, but they are two separate groups as it stands right now. I did mention that I have an EJ team at DEP. We meet quarterly. Our next meeting is actually on March 30th. Liz Callahan is the member for BWSC, and we have a new BWSC EJ team member, Peggy Shaw, who I'm excited to be working with. I also have two legal EJ advisors. One is in attendance here today, Suela John. She is one of my two EJ advisors. And so I'm looking forward to continuing the work at DEP, helping in any way I can with wayside cleanup. I know it's a different bureau than air and waste and water resources, but any way that I can help to assist with the work that you guys are doing in EJ populations, I'm happy to help. And I thank you for your time and your attention. And hopefully I can speak to you all again. And I don't know if you want to ask questions or what you want to do, but I'm going to stay on to listen to the TAG presentation, and then I will sign off. So thank you.
Thank you, Deneen. We do have some questions in the chat if you're ready for them. Take a drink. So the first question, is the EJ policy applicable to other agencies as well? Specifically Department of Revenue? I'm thinking about the brownfields tax credit and how they appear to be dwindling over time. Hold on. Somehow I think you became muted and now I have to find you on the list. There you are. Okay, there you go.
So can you hear me now? Okay. Yep. So the EJ policy is for EEA agencies. So it does not affect any other agency outside of our secretariat. So it includes DCR, DOER, MEPA, OTA, MDR. So it does not include any other agencies outside of EEA secretariat. But that doesn't mean that we don't work with other agencies. We do, because we work with DPH very closely, who is not within our secretary, but they're not bound by the requirements of the EJ policy.
And just as a follow-up to that, the same commenter says, it's about time for a focus on EJ that is more organized and deliberate, tough to do.
I totally agree.
There was a question about our Pip guidance and whether it's available to the public, which I think you mentioned it's internal.
So yeah, so the Pip guidance is an internal document for staff. The actual PIPs, once they're developed based on the guidance, are available. Some staff in some regions are sharing those PIPs. Some are placing them on the website. But the PIP guidance is an internal document just for staff.
Okay. Matt, I've given you the ability to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. Matt Mostello.
Great, thank you, Paul. Hi, Deneen. I represent public water systems on the Waste Site Advisory Committee here. And one question I have, and you may not have an answer, where a portion of a community has been identified as an environmental justice community, and they're served by, you know, a water source that may not geographically fall within that environmental justice community. How is that dealt with? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think we're being asked by Commissioner Suberg to be more liberal. So if it's going to impact a nearby EJ population, or the term we use is potentially impact, we will do outreach to that EJ population just to let them know whether or not they are, you know, actively involved or just want to receive notification. You know, we never know, you know, how involved they want to be, but we are being very deliberate in making sure that if there's any potential impact, that we're doing that outreach to those communities.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Deneen, I have another question from the chat. Even with all the outreach you're even with all the outreach you're seeing, are you seeing resistance from affected populations to engage because they don't feel their input actually matters? And if so, how is DEP addressing this?
So yes and no. I mean, I want to say that I am being, or at least I'm trying to be much more proactive, introduce myself, to make sure that people are feeling heard. I did, for example, a couple of weeks ago, send an email to a community about a grant opportunity, and a response I got back was, which I wasn't ready for, said, "Oh, is this another one of those grants that I fill out the application? I fill out the application and then I come to find out I'm not eligible, I don't get the grant. No, thank you." And I was just like, oh God. So I responded back and said, look, you know, we're being deliberate. Please don't let, you know, a past experience deter you from applying for an opportunity today. You know, I can set up, you know, a conversation with the person who's leading that effort, and to help, you know, facilitate the conversation. But please don't let your community not have an opportunity because of past experiences. We understand, you know, we weren't doing things great. We're trying to be better. So it depends. I mean, I know there's a lot going on with COVID, and I have been stressing to staff every time they're doing outreach to not think that the EJ organizations are not interested or they're not, that they don't care. The EJ populations have been impacted more so than a lot of the other communities across the Commonwealth with COVID. So they're dealing with that. They're dealing with, you know, homelessness. They're dealing with, you know, job insecurity, food insecurity. So just because they don't respond to your first email, don't let that be the only time you communicate. I can actually, you know, do my communications also, which I've been trying to do some follow-up. But I think some staff feel as though we reached out to them, they didn't say anything, you know, we're all set, let's move on. And for me, I am like constantly telling them, you know, there's a lot more going on than just our permit or, you know, our grant that they're dealing with. So, you know, you got to be patient and be sensitive to what they're dealing with. They're dealing with a lot more than a lot of the non-EJ population. So right now, I don't really have any metrics or any other examples I can give you, but I personally am trying to do as much outreach as I can with the staff, in addition to the staff, just to make sure that the EJ organizations understand that we're trying to do better and we can do better.
Okay, two more questions. The first one is relatively straightforward. Is there an EJ PIP for the 2019 MCP reg revisions? And I think the short answer to that is we didn't have the Pip guidance at that time, but kind of reg revisions or permits or, you know, I think all of kind of DEP kind of public activities, you know, in one way or another, we would want to view through the lens of the Pip guidance and make sure that kind of the outreach we do to communities kind of tries to touch all bases. A more specific question, and this may be too specific to answer, is would the community in Weymouth impacted by the compressor station meet the requirements for an EJ community? I don't know if you have this, the data at hand to answer that.
Yeah, I know that I was involved with identifying the EJ populations in Weymouth during the Weymouth Compressor Station project. There were some EJ populations that could be impacted, potentially impacted. I did my piece. I shared my information, and sometimes that's all I can do. I do push behind the scenes. I feel as though sometimes the result is not what the EJ organizations or the communities want. But trust me, I am pushing like crazy behind the scenes. I am making sure that whoever's ear I have listens, understands. I give them data. You can't mess with data. Data is what data is. So I'm doing everything that I can in my power to make sure that I give the information that everyone needs, when they're doing their permitting, when it comes to EJ populations, what it looks like, what impacts are already there. So, I'm doing a lot, but again, we can always do more. And I'm hoping now with this new refocus on EJ and equity within the agency and at the secretariat level, and in the governor's office, that we are going to make some changes that are going to be seen and felt across the Commonwealth.
Okay. Thank you. And so it doesn't look like there are any other specific questions. We did have one more question, which is I'm going to use as the transition to our next piece. And the question was, is there an opportunity for LSPs to be part of stakeholder groups? And I think when you were talking about advisory groups and stakeholder groups, you include in that, of course, our Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee. So I think the answer to that is yes, there's an opportunity for LSPs to be involved in the Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee and other stakeholder groups whenever appropriate.
Yes, and in addition, I am trying to develop, I've been speaking with Commissioner Suberg and Deputy Commissioner Cooper about developing an EJ advisory group. There's so many groups right now that I don't want to add another group into the mix when there's so much going on. But I do want to at some point get into having just an environmental justice advisory groups that could include, and I hope will include LSPs. But there's so much work going on, and everyone is involved with different groups and several groups at a time. So I'm going to take a step back and try to get some of the work done first. And then maybe, halfway through 2021, start really having those conversations with the commissioner and others to start having the advisory group for EJ. And I will definitely look to Paul and Liz for some names that of people who could be interested.
Mm-hmm. And one last final question. This is a quickie. Can you provide the name of the EJ director at EEA?
Sure. Rishi Reddy, R-I-S-H-I. Last name is R-E-D-D-I. I can put it in the chat too if you want.
Great. Yeah, well, let me.
Oh.
Yeah, the chat just comes to me. Let me change that to everybody.
Okay.
There we go. Rishi Reddy.
Okay, get it. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. And Deneen, you said you'd be sticking around for the discussions.
I am. I want to listen to the discussions on the tags, and that once the tag discussion is over, I will probably sign off because I have lots of work to do. Great. But thank you all again.
Well, and any other questions that we get, we will pass on to Deneen and can answer them. Or if not today, then we'll put them in the list of chat questions and answers. Okay, thank you, Deneen. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. And just point out that DEP does have an environmental justice webpage where a lot of material that Deneen was talking about, including the EJ policy, is listed there. That's a good starting point for all of this.